How did ancient Athens justify slavery? Our idea of slavery is far different than what occurred in antiquity. Unlike in contemporary history, ancient slavery was not based on race or skin color and was an unquestioned normalized aspect of society in which even former slaves participated in. Here's how it functioned and was justified in ancient Athens. Slavery in Athens was different than we may imagine, as slaves were often given relative freedom of movement. Many slaves worked domestic jobs, which included going outside without their masters, working as shopkeepers, bankers, and artisans. Back then, it would have been hard to differentiate slaves from freedmen, as they generally resembled middle to lower class individuals just working in the city. On rare occasions, slaves even had their own homes, jobs, and families, simply paying their owners a share of their profits. Many skilled jobs in Athens were even occupied by slaves like milling and pottery. This isn't to say that Athenian slaves didn't suffer from intense mistreatment or limitation of movement, because they certainly did, particularly those in agriculture and mining. It's just that some slaves, particularly domestic ones, worked differently than their modern counterparts. Slavery was also quite important for the functioning of the Athenian state, since the city's economy relied heavily on agriculture and exports, with farming, mining, and artisanry needing tons of manpower to operate. Additionally, slavery was important for Athenian democracy. The labor provided by slaves allowed middle and upper class citizens to function independently, to work for themselves and not another Athenian. This in turn allowed them to be financially independent and participate in the state's democracy, which was quite time-consuming. So slavery was deeply intertwined with how Athens operated, giving it a functional justification. But it was also justified through moral means. Many Athenians just thought nothing of slavery, that it was a normal and unquestionable aspect of their lives. To them, it was an arbitrary calamity, just an unfortunate disaster that could happen to someone that was neither fair nor unfair. When imagining a utopia, the Greeks could not even picture one without slavery, unless that utopia was incredibly primitive and had no concept of wealth or class. Aristotle, the philosopher, took this idea to the extreme. He argued that slavery was natural, that some were destined to rule and others to serve. Those who served, i.e. slaves, were different creatures who possessed organs and emotions enough to live and complete tasks in the same way an animal would. Freedmen could understand virtue, while a slave couldn't, as their souls were inferior. He also played into slavery's supposed necessity for the functioning of Athens, as well as xenophobia, as most slaves were non-Greeks or barbarians. Overall, slavery in ancient Athens is different from contemporary slavery in the sense that slaves had relative freedom, often indistinguishable from freedmen. This isn't to say that slaves liked being slaves, that just isn't true. Rather, slavery in Athens just functioned differently and was so normal that no consideration was given to those who were enslaved. However, justification for slavery resembles its modern counterpart in terms of necessity and dehumanization of slaves. It's often said that history doesn't repeat itself but rhymes, and contemporary slavery, when compared with ancient Athens, is most certainly an example of that.